Malcolm Carter had spent 27 years learning to see what others missed. A fractional shift in a load-bearing wall. The way natural light would pool in a corner 3 seasons from now. The hidden math behind beauty. At 48, he carried this attention into everything, a habit that had built his reputation as one of Atlanta's most reliable architects. Before we move on, tell me in the comments which state you're watching from. And don't forget to subscribe. Tomorrow's episode might be connected to your story. Malcolm Carter stood at the kitchen counter of their Cascade Heights home, watching the Wednesday afternoon light filter through the oak trees outside. The house was quiet. Their youngest had left for college 2 years ago, and the silence had a different quality now, something he was still learning to read. Naomi moved through the living room with her purse and keys. It was 3:10. Malcolm glanced at the clock on the microwave. 3:12. She appeared in the kitchen doorway, wearing the navy cardigan she always chose for Wednesdays. Her expression was calm, almost blank, like she was preparing for something that required a certain kind of focus. "I'm heading out," she said. "Where to?" Malcolm asked. It was a reflex question, one he'd asked 1,000 times. "Just errands. The usual." Her smile was small and automatic. "I'll be back by 5:30. Malcolm nodded. She kissed his cheek, her lips barely grazing his skin, and then she was gone. The front door closed with a soft, final click. He stood there, coffee mug in hand, listening to her car start in the driveway. The engine sound faded down the street. 3:15 exactly. Malcolm walked to the window and watched the empty street. The oak trees swayed gently. A neighbor's dog barked in the distance. Everything was normal. Except it wasn't. He returned to the kitchen and opened his laptop, pulling up the shared calendar Naomi kept for household schedules. He scrolled back. Wednesdays were blank, always blank, marked only with a small dash. He went back further. January. Last year. 3 years ago. Every Wednesday. 3:15 departure. 5:30 return. How long had this been happening? Malcolm opened a new spreadsheet, something he did when a problem needed structure. He began listing dates, working backward from memory. He'd been traveling a lot in recent years, site visits and client meetings, but when he was home on Wednesdays, Naomi left. When he worked late, she left. When he'd been sick with the flu 2 winters ago, she'd still left, returning with tissue boxes and soup, her face drawn with that same distant focus. 20 years. The realization arrived quietly, the way a crack appears in concrete. Slow then certain. She had been doing this for 20 years. Malcolm leaned back in his chair, his architect's mind already running calculations. This wasn't a hobby. It wasn't a standing appointment with friends. Those things shifted, changed, fell apart over time. This was something else. Something load-bearing. Something she protected. He thought of their marriage, the comfortable rhythm of 2 decades together. They talked, laughed, raised 3 children. They had plans for retirement, dreams about traveling. But underneath it all, every Wednesday, Naomi disappeared into a part of her life he couldn't see. The foundation he thought he understood had a hidden blueprint. And Malcolm Carter needed to know what it was. Malcolm didn't sleep well that night. He lay beside Naomi in the darkness, listening to her steady breathing, wondering what she carried that he had never seen. When morning came, he went through the motions of his routine, kissing her goodbye before heading to his firm downtown. But his mind was elsewhere. At his desk, surrounded by blueprints for a new mixed-use development in Midtown, Malcolm found himself opening their bank statements instead. He had access to everything. They had always been transparent about money, or so he thought. The checking account showed regular deposits from both their salaries. His from the architecture firm, hers from her work as a school administrator. The withdrawals were ordinary. Groceries, utilities, car payments, insurance. Nothing unusual. But Naomi had always been careful about money. He remembered now, with new clarity, how she deflected whenever he suggested a vacation that cost more than a few $100s. How she drove her sedan for 12 years before finally replacing it. How she called them investments in the future, but never quite explained what future she meant. Malcolm opened a notebook and began sketching a timeline, the way he would approach a building's history. Their marriage started 23 years ago. A small wedding, her choice. They bought this house 21 years ago, a modest 3-bedroom that she insisted was perfect. 20 years ago, something changed. He tried to remember that year. Their oldest daughter was 3. Naomi's hours at work shifted. She took on extra projects, tutoring and summer programs that brought in additional income. He'd been proud of her ambition, grateful for the extra money as his own career was still finding its footing. Malcolm pulled out his phone and scrolled through old photos. There was one from that time, Naomi holding their daughter at a birthday party. Her smile looked tight, almost painted on. He'd never noticed before. He thought about her brother Marcus. Marcus was 4 years younger than Naomi, always the one who needed saving. Malcolm remembered meeting him early in their relationship, a charismatic guy with big ideas and poor follow-through. There had been trouble back then, something Naomi never fully explained. Legal issues, she'd said. Bad choices. But then, suddenly Marcus got his life together. Started a landscaping business. Became reliable. That was 20 years ago too. Malcolm closed his laptop and stared out the window at the Atlanta skyline. The pieces weren't connecting yet, but the pattern was there. Architects learned to trust patterns. A building's problems always left traces. Weight distributed wrong would show stress fractures. Water damage revealed itself in stains and warping. Marriages were structures too. And something in theirs had been bearing weight he never knew existed. He made a decision then, one that felt like crossing a line he couldn't uncross. Next Wednesday he would follow her. He would see where she went, what she did during those 2 hours and 15 minutes that had become as regular as breathing. Malcolm Carter built his career on understanding foundations. Now he needed to understand the one beneath his own life, even if what he found brought everything down. Wednesday arrived with clear skies and the kind of autumn warmth that made Atlanta feel gentle. Malcolm had called his afternoon client that morning, rescheduling with an excuse about a site emergency. The lie sat uncomfortably in his chest, but not as uncomfortable as the not knowing. He left the office at 2:30 and drove home. Naomi's car was in the driveway. He parked a block away, feeling ridiculous and necessary all at once. At 3:12 her sedan pulled out and turned toward downtown. Malcolm followed, keeping 2 cars between them, his hands tight on the steering wheel. They passed through their neighborhood with its mature trees and well-kept homes, then merged onto the highway. Naomi drove with her usual care, no hurry, no hesitation. She knew this route. They exited near the state capitol building, winding through streets Malcolm recognized from projects he'd worked on years ago. The area had gentrified in waves, old buildings renovated into mixed-use spaces, new condos rising between historic churches. Naomi pulled into a small parking lot beside a 3-story brick building. The sign out front read, Thorn Foundation, Building Communities, Restoring Lives. The lettering was gold, professional, meant to inspire confidence. Malcolm parked across the street, partially hidden by a delivery truck. He watched Naomi sit in her car for a long moment, her head bowed like she was praying or gathering strength. Then she got out, smoothed her cardigan and walked to the entrance. She didn't knock. She opened the door with the familiarity of someone who had done this many times before. Malcolm waited. The minutes stretched. He looked up the Thorn Foundation on his phone. The website showed smiling faces, community events, a mission statement about uplifting families through faith-based financial guidance. The founder and director was Bishop Elias Thorn, a man whose photograph showed silver hair, kind eyes, and the sort of smile that belonged on billboards. Malcolm recognized the name vaguely. Thorn had a reputation in Atlanta's black community as a builder, someone who developed affordable housing and ran youth programs. The kind of man who showed up at city council meetings and charity dinners. Respectable. Connected. An hour passed. Malcolm's back ached from sitting. He thought about going in, confronting whatever this was, but something held him in place. He needed to see the full picture first. At 4:28 the door opened. Naomi emerged and Malcolm's breath caught. Her shoulders sagged in a way he'd never seen, like she'd just set down something impossibly heavy only to know she'd have to pick it up again. Her face was drawn, older somehow. Behind her, a man appeared in the doorway. Tall, wearing a tailored charcoal suit that probably cost more than Malcolm's monthly car payment. Bishop Elias Thorn. He said something to Naomi, his expression benevolent, almost fatherly. Then he raised his hand in a gentle wave, a gesture of blessing or dismissal. Naomi didn't wave back. She walked to her car, got in and drove away. Thorn stood in the doorway a moment longer, his smile fading into something else. Something cold and satisfied. Then he turned and disappeared back inside. Malcolm sat in his car, hands shaking, the pieces of the pattern finally taking shape. This wasn't an affair. This was something worse. Something that had been draining his wife, week after week, year after year, while a man in an expensive suit smiled and waved from his doorway. Malcolm started his engine and drove home. He needed to hear the truth from Naomi's own voice. And tonight he would ask for it. Malcolm arrived home first. He sat in the living room, the same room where they'd celebrated birthdays and Christmas mornings, where their children had taken their first steps. The evening light slanted through the windows, casting long shadows across the furniture. When Naomi's car pulled into the driveway at 5:32, his heart hammered against his ribs. She came through the door with grocery bags, her mask back in place. "Hey baby. I picked up something for dinner. Thought we could do that salmon you like." Malcolm stood. "We need to talk." Her hands stilled on the bags. She looked at him, really looked, and something in her face shifted. Recognition. Maybe even relief. "Okay," she said quietly. She set the bags on the counter and walked to the couch, sitting down slowly like her bones ached. Malcolm sat across from her in the armchair. The space between them felt enormous. "I followed you today," he said. No preamble. No soft approach. To the Thorn Foundation. Naomi closed her eyes. Her hands folded in her lap, fingers intertwining, knuckles pale. "How long have you known?" she asked. "That you go somewhere every Wednesday?" "Just figured it out." "That it's been 20 years? Also just figured it out?" His voice cracked despite his effort to stay calm. "Naomi, what is this? What have you been doing?" She was quiet for so long he thought she might not answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "I've been paying a debt." "What debt?" "We don't have any debt except the mortgage and—" "Not we. Me." She opened her eyes, and they were filled with tears that hadn't fallen yet. "A debt I took on before you, and I even talked about combining finances. A debt I never told you about." Malcolm felt the ground shift beneath him. "For what?" Naomi's breath shuddered. "For Marcus." The name hung in the air between them. 20 years ago, Marcus got himself into serious trouble. He was running with some guys, doing things I didn't even fully understand. Moving money for them, helping with deals that weren't legal. Bishop Thorne was involved, not as a pastor back then, just as a businessman with connections. When things went bad, Marcus was going to take the fall. Prison time, Malcolm. Real prison time. She wiped at her eyes with the back of her hand. "Thorne came to me. Said he could make it go away. He had connections with lawyers, with people who could bury the case. But it would cost money. A lot of money. He called it a charitable loan, said it was about helping family, keeping our community strong. I was 26 years old, terrified, and Marcus was my baby brother." "How much?" Malcolm asked, though he wasn't sure he wanted to know. The original amount was $50,000. Malcolm's stomach dropped. "50,000? Naomi." I know. But I didn't have it. No bank would give me that kind of loan. Thorne said he would, but the terms?" She laughed bitterly. "The terms were designed to never end. High interest, compounding in ways I didn't understand. Penalties if I missed a payment. I've been paying $2,800 a month for 20 years, Malcolm. $2,800 every single month." Malcolm did the math in his head, the architect in him unable to stop calculating. $672,000. She'd paid over $500,000 on a $50,000 loan. "Why didn't you tell me?" His voice broke completely now. "We're married. We could have figured something out together." "Because I was ashamed," Naomi said, the tears finally spilling over. "Because I made a stupid, desperate choice and I didn't want you to think less of me. And then time passed and it became this thing I couldn't talk about without destroying everything. So I just kept paying. I kept going every Wednesday, handing over money to that man, watching him smile at me like he was doing me a favor." She buried her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking. Malcolm crossed the space between them and pulled her into his arms. She collapsed against him, 20 years of weight finally breaking through. "We're going to fix this," he whispered into her hair. "I don't know how yet, but we're going to fix this." But even as he said it, he wondered if some things, once broken, could ever be made whole again. Malcolm didn't go to work the next day. He called in, told his partner he needed personal time, and sat up at the dining room table like it was a war room. Naomi had barely slept. He'd heard her moving through the house in the dark hours, the weight of her secret finally spoken aloud but not yet lifted. When morning came, she sat across from him with coffee neither of them drank. "I need to see everything," Malcolm said. "Every document, every receipt, every piece of paper Thorne ever gave you." Naomi nodded and disappeared upstairs. She returned carrying a small lockbox, the kind people kept birth certificates and passports in. She set it on the table between them and opened it with a key she wore on a chain around her neck. Malcolm had seen that necklace for years, assumed it was just jewelry. Inside were folders organized by year. Naomi pulled them out one by one, spreading them across the table. Handwritten receipts on Thorn Foundation letterhead, each one documenting a payment. $2,800. Every month. For 240 months. Malcolm put on his reading glasses and began going through them systematically. The receipts were meticulous, almost obsessive in their detail. Date, amount, payment number, remaining balance. Except the balance never seemed to shrink in any meaningful way. "He keeps paper records?" Malcolm asked. "Always. He says it's about trust, keeping things personal. But I think he just doesn't want electronic trails." Smart, Malcolm thought. And arrogant. He opened his laptop and created a new spreadsheet, entering every payment with its date and amount. The pattern emerged quickly, brutal in its clarity. The interest rate was effectively 23% annually, compounded monthly. Payments were applied to interest first, principal last. Legal loan sharking. Malcolm leaned back, removing his glasses to rub his eyes. This is predatory lending. It's illegal in Georgia. He calls it a private charitable agreement. Says it's not subject to the same laws. That's not how laws work, Naomi. I know that now, she said quietly. I didn't know it then. Malcolm spent the next 3 hours researching. He pulled up Georgia's usury laws, regulations on lending practices, definitions of financial exploitation. He found articles about predatory lenders who targeted black communities, using trust and desperation as leverage. He found patterns that matched Thorne's operation exactly. Then he searched for Bishop Elias Thorne himself. The public record was impressive. The Thorne Foundation had been operating for 25 years, focusing on community development and financial assistance. Thorne sat on boards, spoke at churches, appeared in photographs with city council members and state representatives. His real estate holdings were extensive, primarily in historically black neighborhoods undergoing gentrification. But buried deeper, Malcolm found cracks. A few years ago there had been a quiet lawsuit, settled out of court, involving allegations of predatory lending. The case disappeared from public view, records sealed. Last year, a small community newspaper ran a piece questioning the foundation's lending practices, but it gained no traction. Most telling, Malcolm found references to an ongoing state investigation into nonprofit financial practices. Nothing specific named Thorne, but the timeline and description matched. People have tried to stop him before, Malcolm said, showing Naomi the articles. But he's insulated. Reputation, connections, money. He makes problems disappear. Like he did for Marcus, Naomi said bitterly. Does Marcus know? About how much you've actually paid? Naomi shook her head. He thinks I loaned him $10,000 from my savings and he paid me back years ago. That's what I told him. I didn't want him carrying this. Malcolm understood the impulse, but it frustrated him. So many secrets, all designed to protect people who maybe didn't need protecting in the ways Naomi thought. He returned to his spreadsheet, adding notes, cross-referencing data. His architect's mind saw the structure of Thorne's operation clearly now. It was a system built on shame and isolation, counting on victims staying silent. We need help, Malcolm said finally. Someone who knows how to fight this legally. Oh, Malcolm, he has lawyers. He has money. He has everything except what we have now. Malcolm turned the laptop toward her, showing the organized data, the documented pattern, 20 years of evidence. The truth on record, willing to be told. Naomi stared at the screen, something shifting in her expression. Not hope exactly, not yet. But maybe the first blueprint of it. Malcolm found Cynthia Reed's name in one of the articles about state financial investigations. She was listed as a senior investigator with the Georgia Department of Banking and Finance, specializing in predatory lending cases. Her office was in a state building downtown, the kind of place with metal detectors and tired security guards. He called and left a message, expecting nothing. She called back within 2 hours. Mr. Carter? You said you have information about the Thorne Foundation? Her voice was direct, no warmth but no hostility either. Professional. My wife has been making payments to Bishop Thorne for 20 years. I have documentation of every single one. There was a pause. I'd like to see that documentation. Can you come in tomorrow morning? The meeting was set for 9. Malcolm told Naomi and she agreed to come, though her anxiety was visible in the way she moved through the house that evening, unable to settle. The next morning, they sat in a small conference room with gray walls and fluorescent lighting. Cynthia Reed was younger than Malcolm expected, late 40s maybe, with natural hair pulled back in a neat bun and sharp eyes that assessed them both quickly. Malcolm laid out the folders. Cynthia put on reading glasses and began going through them methodically, occasionally making notes on a legal pad. The silence stretched for almost 20 minutes. Finally she looked up. This is extraordinary. Most victims of this kind of scheme don't keep records like this. I didn't know I was a victim, Naomi said quietly. I thought I was just paying back what I owed. Cynthia's expression softened slightly. That's how these operations work. They make you feel like you're the one who failed, not them. She tapped the folders. We've been looking at Thorne for 3 years. He's careful, operates in legal gray areas, uses his community standing as a shield. But this. She gestured at the papers. This is a pattern we can use. What do you need from us? Malcolm asked. First, I need a formal statement from Mrs. Carter. Everything on record. Then I need you to understand something. Cynthia leaned forward. Thorne has powerful friends. Lawyers who know how to delay and deflect. This won't be quick and it won't be easy. He'll push back. We understand, Malcolm said, though he wasn't entirely sure they did. Do you? Because people who challenge Elias Thorne tend to find their lives becoming very uncomfortable. Reputation attacks, professional complications, social pressure. He doesn't get violent, but he doesn't need to. Naomi's hands tightened in her lap. So we just let him keep doing this? I didn't say that. I'm saying be prepared. Cynthia closed the folders. If you're willing to testify to let us build a case using your experience, we have a real chance. But you need to be all in. Malcolm looked at Naomi. She looked back at him. In her eyes, he saw 2 decades of fear beginning to transform into something else. Something harder. We're in, Naomi said. They spent the next 2 hours going over details, signing statements, authorizing Cynthia to subpoena records. When they finally left the building, the afternoon sun felt too bright. Malcolm's phone rang that evening while they were eating a quiet dinner. A known number. He almost didn't answer. Mr. Carter? The voice was smooth, deep, familiar from a distance. This is Bishop Elias Thorne. I understand there may be some confusion about my arrangement with your wife. I'd like to clear that up before any misunderstandings spread. Malcolm's blood went cold. How did you get this number? I make it my business to know the people in my community. Naomi missed this week's payment. That's unusual for her. I wanted to make sure everything is all right. The implied threat was clear as glass. Everything's fine, Malcolm said carefully. We're just reassessing our finances. I see. Well, I'd hate for there to be any complications. Naomi and I have had a good working relationship for many years. I trust that will continue. Pause. Give her my regards. The line went dead. Malcolm set the phone down slowly. Naomi was staring at him, her face pale. He knows, Malcolm said. And the war had officially begun. The attack started small. 2 days after Malcolm's call with Thorne, his firm received an anonymous complaint through their website. The message claimed Malcolm had misrepresented project timelines to a client, causing financial harm. It was completely fabricated, but it required a response, documentation, hours of Malcolm's time pulled away from actual work. His partner, Jerome, called him into the office. What's this about, Mal? This doesn't sound like any project we've worked on. It's not real, Malcolm said. Someone's trying to make trouble. Jerome studied him. They'd been friends since graduate school, had built the firm together. Does this have something to do with why you've been distracted lately? Malcolm wanted to explain, but the words felt too complicated, too exposing. Personal issue. I'm handling it. Handle it faster. We can't afford this kind of noise. The next hit came through social media. A local blog that covered Atlanta community news ran a piece titled, When Trust Becomes Weaponized. It didn't name Malcolm or Naomi directly, but it described certain individuals who were trying to damage the reputation of community leaders through false accusations and opportunistic claims. The comments section filled quickly with people defending Thorne, calling the unnamed accusers greedy and ungrateful. Naomi showed Malcolm the article, her hands shaking. People are going to know it's about us. Let them, Malcolm said, though his stomach was tight. We're not doing anything wrong. But the pressure was real and it was working. Malcolm found himself second-guessing every decision, every conversation. At the grocery store, he wondered if the woman staring at him recognized them from church social circles. At a site meeting, he caught himself losing focus, thinking about Thorne's network of influence. Naomi had it worse. A former colleague called, asking in a too casual voice if everything was okay, if there was anything Naomi wanted to talk about. The message was clear. Word was spreading. Cynthia called with an update. Thorne's lawyers filed a motion claiming your wife's payments were gifts, not loan repayments. They're arguing she has no legal standing to claim predatory lending. Gifts? She has receipts that say payment. I know. We're fighting it. But Malcolm, this is what I warned you about. He's going to make this as difficult as possible. That night, Malcolm couldn't sleep. He stood at the bedroom window, looking out at their quiet street, thinking about the life they'd built here. Good neighbors, a respected career, children who were thriving. All of it felt fragile now, like a building with compromised foundations. Naomi appeared beside him, wrapping her arms around his waist from behind. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I brought this into our lives." "No," Malcolm said firmly. "Thorn brought this into our lives. You were just trying to survive it." They stood together in the darkness, and Malcolm felt something crystallize inside him. Thorn was using their fear, their desire for peace, as a weapon. He was counting on them breaking under pressure, walking away, disappearing back into silence. But Malcolm was an architect. He understood pressure. He understood how to find the weak points in a structure, the places where force could be redirected, where a system could be made to collapse inward on itself. "We need to change the game," he said. "What do you mean?" Malcolm turned to face her. "Thorn thinks we're going to play defense, try to protect ourselves while he attacks. But what if we go on offense? What if we give him what he wants? I don't understand. You've missed 2 payments now. He's going to expect you to come back, probably try to renegotiate, show you're still under his control." Malcolm's mind was racing now, seeing the blueprint. What if you do exactly that? What if you ask for a meeting? "Malcolm, I can't go back there. Not alone. And not unarmed." He pulled out his phone and texted Cynthia. "Can you get a wire? We want to set up a sting." The response came quickly. "That's extremely risky." Malcolm typed back, "So is letting him win." He showed Naomi the exchange. Her face was pale, but her jaw was set. "If we do this," she said slowly, "we do it right. We get everything on record. We end this." "We end this," Malcolm agreed. The wire was smaller than Malcolm expected, barely visible under Naomi's blouse. Cynthia had insisted on testing it 3 times before they left the staging area, a coffee shop 2 blocks from their target location. "Remember," Cynthia said, adjusting her own earpiece, "you're just asking to renegotiate terms. Get him talking about the original loan, the interest structure, anything that establishes the predatory nature of the agreement. If he threatens you, even implicitly, that's gold." Naomi nodded, but her hands were unsteady. Malcolm took them in his own. "You've faced him every Wednesday for 20 years, he said quietly. "This is just one more time. Except this time you're not alone." The location was Thorn's choice, a small park near his foundation offices. Public enough to seem safe, private enough for a conversation. Neutral ground, or so Thorn thought. Malcolm and Cynthia positioned themselves on a bench 50 yards away, partially hidden by a large oak tree. Malcolm had a clear line of sight to the picnic table where Naomi sat waiting, her posture rigid. Thorn arrived exactly on time, walking with the confidence of a man who'd never been truly challenged. He wore a crisp white shirt and slacks, no jacket despite the cool November air. His smile was warm as he approached Naomi. Malcolm's hands clenched into fists. Through the earpiece, Thorn's voice came through clearly. "Naomi, it's been too long since we talked face to face. I was concerned when you missed your payments." "I need to discuss new terms," Naomi said. Her voice was steadier than Malcolm expected. "The amount is becoming impossible to maintain." Thorn sat down across from her, his expression shifting to something practiced, sympathetic. "I understand financial pressure. But we have an agreement, one that's kept your family safe for 2 decades. Your brother, your husband's reputation, your children's futures. That protection has value. I've paid over $600,000 on a $50,000 loan. You've paid for discretion. For intervention. For the kind of help that doesn't come cheap." Thorn leaned forward slightly. "Let me be clear, Naomi. The terms we established aren't negotiable. They exist because of choices your brother made, choices that could still resurface if our arrangement ends poorly." Malcolm felt Cynthia tense beside him. That was close to an explicit threat. "My brother doesn't even know what I've paid," Naomi said. "Perhaps he should. Perhaps your husband should understand the full scope of what protecting family really costs." Thorn's voice hardened. "I heard you've been talking to people. Government people. That's disappointing. That shows a lack of gratitude." "Gratitude for what?" "For trapping me in a debt I can never escape. For keeping your family whole." Thorn stood, and for the first time his benevolent mask fully dropped. "You think you're the first person to question me? To think they can walk away? Let me tell you what happens to people who try to expose what they call my schemes. They find their lives becoming very complicated. Jobs disappear. Reputations crumble. Sometimes legal troubles emerge from unexpected places. Malcolm started to rise, but Cynthia gripped his arm, shaking her head. So here's what's going to happen, Thorne continued, his voice cold and precise. You're going to continue our arrangement under the current terms, which, I should mention, are extremely generous compared to what they could be. You're going to stop talking to investigators. And you're going to make this month's payment, plus a penalty for the disruption, within 48 hours. And if I don't? Then we revisit the original situation with your brother. I kept certain documentation, certain evidence that never made it to authorities. I'd hate for that to change. I'd also hate for your husband's firm to face scrutiny over their handling of city contracts. Amazing what a few well-placed questions can do. Naomi stood slowly. You're threatening my entire family. I'm reminding you of reality. I've built something in this community that matters. I won't let one ungrateful woman tear it down because she couldn't handle her commitments. Thorne straightened his shirt. 48 hours, Naomi. Don't make me come looking for you again. He walked away without another word. Naomi remained standing at the table, her shoulders shaking. Malcolm broke from the bench and ran to her, pulling her into his arms as Cynthia spoke rapidly into her phone, coordinating with her team. Did you get it? Naomi whispered against Malcolm's chest. Every word, Cynthia said, approaching them with something fierce in her eyes. Every single word. The next 72 hours moved with the speed of a controlled demolition. Cynthia's team moved fast, armed with the recording and Naomi's 2 decades of documentation. Warrants were issued. Bank records were subpoenaed. Other victims, emboldened by news of the investigation, began coming forward with their own stories. Thorne's arrest happened on a Thursday morning, filmed by local news crews who'd been tipped off. Malcolm watched it on his phone from his office, the man who'd seemed untouchable now in handcuffs, his face twisted with rage and disbelief. The charges were extensive: racketeering, predatory lending, extortion, financial fraud. The DA's office, sensing a high-profile win, threw everything they had at the case. Thorne's lawyers fought back hard, but the evidence was overwhelming. 23 victims came forward, some with payment histories even longer than Naomi's. The media coverage was intense. Atlanta's news stations ran segments on predatory lending in black communities, on how trust and faith had been weaponized. Thorne's foundation was shut down, its assets frozen. The real estate empire he'd built started to crumble as properties were seized and sold off. Malcolm and Naomi didn't give interviews despite constant requests. They watched from the edges as Thorne's carefully constructed image collapsed into rubble. 3 months after the arrest, Thorne's lawyers approached the DA with a plea deal. In exchange for a reduced sentence and cooperation in identifying his financial network, Thorne would agree to full restitution for all identified victims. Cynthia called Malcolm with the news. The check will be substantial. We calculated it based on what you should have owed versus what you actually paid. With interest and penalties assessed against him, it's going to be life-changing. When the check arrived by registered mail, Malcolm and Naomi sat at their dining room table staring at it. $587,000. It doesn't feel real, Naomi said. It's not enough, Malcolm replied. No amount of money gives back 20 years. But it was something. It was justice in the only form the system could provide. They paid off the mortgage first. The house that had sheltered them, that Naomi had chosen so carefully while carrying her secret burden, was finally truly theirs. They set up college funds for their grandchildren. They took the vacation to Ghana that Naomi had dreamed about for years but never allowed herself to consider. But the real healing was slower, more complicated than any financial transaction. Malcolm found himself angry at unexpected moments, grieving for the easier life they could have had if Naomi had trusted him with the truth from the beginning. Naomi struggled with shame that didn't disappear just because Thorne was behind bars. Some nights she still woke up at 3 in the morning, her body remembering the weight of Wednesday afternoons. They went to counseling, sitting in a therapist's office talking through 2 decades of secrets and silence. Learning how to be married again, or maybe for the first time without shadows between them. Marcus came to visit one Sunday, his confusion and guilt visible when Naomi finally told him the full truth. He'd had no idea, thought he'd paid off a small loan years ago, had been living his quiet, honest life while his sister sacrificed herself. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked, tears streaming down his face. "Because I was your big sister," Naomi said simply. "And that's what I thought I was supposed to do." Malcolm watched them hold each other and cry, and understood that some structures, once broken, had to be completely reimagined before they could be rebuilt. One evening in late spring, Malcolm and Naomi sat on their back porch watching the sunset paint the sky orange and pink. The air was warm, carrying the scent of the neighbor's jasmine. "I've been thinking," Naomi said quietly, "about what we do with what's left." They'd spent some of the restitution money, but much of it remained, sitting in accounts like a question waiting to be answered. "I have some ideas too," Malcolm said. "But you first." Naomi turned to look at him, and in her eyes he saw something he hadn't seen in all their years together. Complete openness, nothing hidden, nothing held back. "I want to help people," she said. "People like me who are trapped and don't know where to turn. I want to use what happened to us to make sure it doesn't happen to others." Malcolm reached for her hand. "Then let's build something. Together this time." "Together," she agreed. And for the first time in 20 years, Wednesday was just another day. 6 months after Thorne's conviction, Malcolm stood in a small community center in West End, watching Naomi address a room full of people. The space was modest, with folding chairs and fluorescent lights, but it felt purposeful. "My name is Naomi Carter," she said, her voice steady and clear. "And 20 years ago I made a choice that I thought was protecting my family. Instead, it nearly destroyed everything I loved." She told her story simply, without drama or embellishment. The room was silent except for her voice. When she finished, several people were crying. An older woman in the front row raised her hand. "How did you find the courage to fight back?" Naomi smiled, glancing at Malcolm. "I didn't do it alone. That was the lesson I had to learn. We're taught to be strong, to handle our burdens, to protect our families at any cost. But real strength is letting people help you carry what's too heavy to bear alone." The Cornerstone Fund had been Malcolm's idea for a name, but everything else they'd built together. Using a portion of the restitution money, they'd established a non-profit offering free financial counseling, small emergency loans with zero interest, and legal referrals for people trapped in predatory agreements. They partnered with local churches, community centers, and legal aid organizations. Naomi had discovered a gift for counseling. People trusted her because she'd lived what they were living. She didn't judge or lecture. She listened and helped them find their way out of the darkness she knew so well. Malcolm used his architectural skills in unexpected ways, designing systems and structures for how the fund operated, creating frameworks for sustainability. He also joined the board of a nonprofit focused on affordable housing, determined to understand the pressures that made people vulnerable to predators like Thorne in the first place. Their children had been shocked at first when they learned the full story, angry that they'd never known, grateful that their parents had found their way back to each other. Their oldest daughter joined the Cornerstone Fund's board, bringing her accounting skills to help manage the finances. Marcus became one of their first major donors, unable to repay his sister for her sacrifice but determined to honor it by helping others. His landscaping business thrived, and he made it a practice to hire young people who needed second chances, the kind of chances Naomi had bought for him without his knowing. On a cool October evening, almost a year after everything changed, Malcolm and Naomi hosted a small gathering at their home. Friends, family, some of the people they'd helped through the fund. The house filled with laughter and conversation, life spilling into every room. Cynthia Reed was there, off-duty and relaxed in a way Malcolm hadn't seen during the investigation. She'd become a friend, someone who understood the particular kind of battle they'd fought. "You two did something remarkable," Cynthia said, sipping wine on the back porch. "Most people who go through what you went through either fall apart or just try to forget. You turned it into something that matters." "We had good help," Malcolm said. "We still do." Later, after the guests had left and they'd cleaned up the last of the dishes, Malcolm and Naomi stood in their bedroom. It was late, almost midnight. 20 years ago, almost to the day, Naomi had signed Thorne's papers and begun the longest Wednesday of her life. "Do you ever regret it?" Malcolm asked. "Telling me, fighting back all of it?" Naomi considered the question seriously. "I regret the 20 years of silence. I regret not trusting you sooner. But the fight? No. That gave me myself back." She moved to the window, looking out at their quiet street. "I spent so long living in fear, measuring my life in Wednesday afternoons and payments I could barely afford. Now I wake up and Wednesday is just Wednesday. That's worth everything we went through." Malcolm joined her at the window, putting his arm around her waist. "I spent my whole career designing buildings," he said, "trying to create spaces that would last, that would serve people well. But the most important thing I've ever built is this. The second version of us." "The honest version," Naomi said softly. "The honest version," he agreed. They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the moonlight filter through the oak trees. Somewhere in the city, Someone else was probably trapped in the kind of darkness that had consumed Naomi for so long. But tomorrow they'd be at the Cornerstone Fund, ready to help light the way out. Malcolm thought about blueprints and foundations, about how the strongest structures were built on truth and tested by time. He thought about his wife, who'd carried an impossible weight for 2 decades and emerged not broken but refined. Stronger in the places where she'd once been fractured. "What are you thinking?" Naomi asked. Malcolm kissed her temple. "That every building project teaches you something. And this one taught me that the best foundations are built together, in full light, with no hidden corners." Naomi smiled, truly smiled, the kind of smile that reached her eyes and settled into her bones. "Then let's keep building." And together they turned away from the window and toward the future they were finally free to design. If this story meant something to you, please like the video and subscribe to our channel. Let us know in the comments which moment stayed with you the most. Your words truly matter to us. Thanks for watching.